Storytelling is the art of telling amazing stories. And I want to make a deal. Give me 1 minute and I give you such a clear picture of what storytelling means in practical terms, in terms that you cannot just understand, but actually use and apply to structure your stories, that you'll get the brain equivalent of a sugar rush. Ready? Let's go. Stories are not driven by characters and are not driven by plot. That's nonsense. Stories are driven by change, and change happens to characters. A story is a significant, irreversible change in the life of a character. This big, irreversible change happens progressively, following a sequence of smaller incremental changes caused by a series of events. That sequence of events is called plot. Every story has one. The story structure is the order in which you decide to show the plot. Choosing wisely which events go into the plot and which events stay out is half the battle to engage the reader. And last but not least, what the final change of the story means to you is the reason you're telling the story. And time, a bit fast, but pretty good. But enough with the trailers. Let's get to this video. The first thing to know is that writing great prose and telling great stories are two completely different skills. You can be a sublime wordsmith and still put people to sleep, and you can be a mediocre writer on a technical level and still tell incredible stories that people love. Knowing how to build better stories, it's more important than writing great prose. So if you have to start from zero, start from storytelling. Once you know what you're doing, you can start improving how you're doing it and go hard on the prose. I did the exact opposite because I didn't know any better, and it wasn't pretty. With this out of the way, let's take a look at what a story actually is, because if we have to build one, we first need to understand what we're building. Here comes the definition. A story is a selection of significant events taken from the lives of a cast of characters with the purpose of triggering specific emotions and ideas in an audience. I know it's not the most user-friendly definition in the world, but it's packed with great info, so bear with it for a moment. Selection of significant events means that the story isn't just what happened chronologically that we report. In a story, we decide what to include and what to leave out. We take what's significant, and we'll see in a moment what that means, and we throw away the rest. Purpose means there should be a reason if you're telling the story you're telling. It means that something in there speaks to you personally and you want to share it, and that it takes the tone of the story and the selection of the significant events you are going to show. So purpose and meaning, it's pretty important stuff. Okay, now I can finally tell you what makes an event significant enough to be included in your story. Because it's not arbitrary, and it's pretty much the core of this whole thing. So if you can take home just one piece of information, let it be this one. Because having a reliable method to understand if something belongs or not in your story completely changes not just the writing, but the editing. You can see through the metrics. It strips this veil of mystery that you can feel every time you know something is wrong in the text, but you can really see why. All that gone. Let me show you how it works. A significant event is an event that brings meaningful change in the story. And for a change to be meaningful, it has to happen to a character. It has to be a clear switch in a universal human quality, which is a fancy way to say that the character goes from good to bad, from love to hate, or from truth to lie, right to wrong, hope, despair. You got the gist. And for a change to be meaningful, it has to be caused by an actual conflict. It can't happen by chance, because it wouldn't carry the emotional charge you need to engage the reader. These three things define a story event. And ideally, every scene in your story should be centered around a story event, with a character going through a conflict that causes a switch from one quality to the opposite. For example, take the duel between Luke and Darth Vader in The Empire Strikes Back. It starts in the carbon freezing chamber and evolves as they go through Cloud City, becoming more and more violent as the emotion conflict rises, until it peaks when Vader tells Luke he's not the man who killed his father.
I am your father.
And Luke goes from vengeful to desperate and jumps, changing quality to a character through conflict equals keeper scene. But it doesn't end here. You can take the same genius concept and scale it further. Some changes are too big to be developed in just one scene. That's why we have sequences. A sequence is a chain of independent scenes, each one with its own little change, that together build toward a higher change. And speaking of higher change, subscribe if you aren't already. Now let me give you an example of a sequence. We're still in Star Wars, but this time it's A New Hope. When the Millennium Falcon is captured on the Death Star, Luke and the rest of the band become prisoners of the Empire. Getting free, it's a pretty heavy status to change. So we have the scene where they sneak out from the Falcon, the scene where they save the princess, the trash compactor scene, and the scene of the deactivation of the tractor beam. Altogether, these scenes create a sequence that changes the status of our rebel friends from prisoners to free people. But there are changes that goes beyond that. There are changes that steer the whole story in a new direction, and to build that kind of change, we need a full act, which is nothing but more sequences combined, or a sequence with some extra scenes around if it's a short act. For example, at the beginning of The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins isn't remotely thinking about having a real adventure, but 30 pages later he signs up for one. Their first act is all there. We have the introduction of Bilbo's ordinary world, the call to adventure at dinner, the refusal, the mentor, and the crossing of the threshold when Bilbo finally leaves the house without an handkerchief. Classic hero's journey first act. When you combine more acts together, you get a full story. But the story can be called the story only when these acts culminate in a climax that brings a change that is absolute and irreversible. The irreversibility of the final change is fundamental because the climax of the story is also the climax of the emotional involvement of the reader. And if the change isn't irreversible, the reader will start questioning what was the point of the whole thing and will recommend your book to family and friends. And rightfully so. Therefore, treasure these simple but outrageously powerful considerations about storytelling and story structure. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're an outliner or a discovery writer. Once you have a broad view of the base mechanics of a story and you have a story idea, and you figure out why you're telling the story, you can start building from the inside out, scene after scene, change after change, and grow it organically into something coherent, original, meaningful, and yours. It's awesome. And it's also the first step to build stories that engage everyone. If you like this video, I got another one about world building somewhere around here, so check it out if you think you could be interested, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.